Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to call to order the Public Works Committee meeting for Tuesday, November 15th, 2016. And looking out at the audience, this is the place to be. So if you're watching this on TV, you might want to come on down. Brenda, roll call, please.
Doyle.
Here.
Estes. Here. Solomon. Here. Drew. Here. Nordstrom. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brenda. Next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Do I have any changes? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
I make a motion.
I have a motion by Solomon.
Second.
And a second by Drew to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda is adopted. Now is the time for general public comment, which is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns to the committee on any issue not limited to items on the agenda. Action, however, will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not on the agenda except by placement thereon by unanimous vote of the aldermen present. I have no general public comment speaker request forms. Is there anyone who had wanted to submit one? Okay, moving on to consent items 1 through 21. Public comment is open, and public comment is now closed, seeing no speaker request forms. Would any committee member like to remove an item from the consent calendar for separate consideration?
21, please.
Item number 21. Any others? I would entertain a motion to adopt the balance of the consent calendar.
So moved.
I have a motion by Estes, second by Drew to approve consent items 1 through 20. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Items 1 through 20 are now approved. Item number 21 is to authorize Mayor and Finance Officer to sign resolution number 2016-066, establishing rates for the Rapid City Department of Parks and Recreation. I'll yield the floor to Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could ask a question to Jeff Biegler and Doug Lowe.
Please.
Hello, Jeff. Thank you. So some questions on these price increases. These are probably pretty standard from year to year, from what I understand.
Yes, they are.
You know, one thing as I was looking through this and looking at the different rates, one thing that came to mind was, I'm curious, let's talk the golf courses. How often are youth playing golf? You know, the kiddos, the juniors, because we're raising the rates on them. I'm curious how much youth participation we have.
I will let Doug Lowe, our Recreation Division Manager, tackle that.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Doug.
We have about a 10% usage rate of youth at the golf courses. Our past sales in the last 2 years have been about 15% for the youth. Are also at Meadowbrook, we have about 170 kids that partake in our youth development program there. So it's probably, give or take, it's probably about 10% usage for youth.
Would you say the trend for youngsters using the golf course, is it going up or down?
For youth, that is?
Yeah, for you.
I would say it's about average. It's consistently at our golf courses, it's been about 10% for about 2 or 3 years. Now, we've been trying to implement more programming out at Meadowbrook. We have a Bring a Kid to Golf Day. We also have implemented Purple Tees out there, which allows kids to tee off from like the middle of the fairway so they can play with their parents and not feel intimidated by the big course. We also have family night out at Meadowbrook in the evenings too. So we're trying to create more play for youth. We also know that is the future of golf, is the youth and the young adults. So we're trying to work on that market real well.
So we have a lot, just from the budget hearings I recall, we have a lot invested into our golf courses. And I'm curious if we have the market in the future in order to sustain those golf courses, or if usage will decline or increase. And why I go back to the rates is I wonder if we just raise rates every year for everybody across the board, does it hurt usage? Does it encourage usage? Do we have other ideas, like if you buy an adult pass, you get to bring your kid with you free or something? What do we do to encourage more kids to use it so that the golf courses are more sustainable in the future? I guess that's the heart of my question.
One thing with our golf program that I was talking about, where we have 170 kids in, included in that program is a season pass for them too. So we do encourage them to take lessons and also go apply that onto the course themselves. So we have that included in there. Like I said, with our Bring a Kid to Golf days, the parents get a discounted rate in the evenings to bring their kid to play, and they get to play for free along with a parent green fee. So we do have some of that implemented. It's probably something more that we need to market a lot harder, possibly, to try and increase that and get that awareness out there that we have these programs, but we do have them in place, and they are successful, but probably could be a lot more successful if we had a lot more dollars to be able to spend in that nature.
And last question is regarding senior citizens. A lot of them are in fixed incomes, and this is a way for them to get out and get some exercise and enjoy things. Do we just automatically raise the rates every year? Do we take into account the different markets and who can pay more and what should be leveled off? I'm curious how we come to just the percentage of increase, which is basically 5 to 10% on most of these. And I'm wondering if they could be a little more strategic or if it's aligned with how things should be.
What we've done in the past is we always try and stay within the median market value of all the golf courses in the Black Hills area. We try and keep them prices like in the middle of the top 6 golf courses in the Rapid City area, meaning Red Rocks, Hart Ranch, Elks, Hot Springs, Spearfish, and us. So we've always tried to keep our rates kind of in the middle tier of those 6 golf courses. And that's kind of how we derive our pricing, is from that. So.
Okay. I'm done with my questioning. I'll yield the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And gentlemen, I want to thank you for the link that you just sent over today that has the additional 2 columns that is very helpful for me, is the dollar amount increase and then also the percentage increases on it. So thank you. That's very helpful for me to understand what's going on. If I may follow up a little bit on the youth golfing. I was reading over the minutes, and first of all, let me ask the question about the invite. I see you have several, according to the minutes, you have a few people from the golf course attend this meeting, and some of them are several years of experience with that. Am I assuming that correctly, that they're getting invited, or it's just a public notice, or how do you do that? Awareness.
Well, when this came to our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, we did let them know that it was coming, and in addition, Doug has met with them at their regular meetings to let them know that the increases were coming, so that we made it aware to them that it'd be a good idea if they came and expressed their opinions of it, which they did.
And I see by your minutes that they did come in and acknowledge that. And I did have a phone call from only one golfer that, and it's recited in your minutes as well, the draft minutes, that is. That's the major concern of all the golfers is making sure that it's not contracted out. That's the theme that I was getting out of their conversation.
That was the concern of the group that did show up at the Parks and Rec Advisory Board.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. No intentions of contracting.
No, that is something that's come up over the years as an option, and there are no plans at this time to do any contracting out, and they just wanted to express their opinion that they're very satisfied with the management of the course as it is now.
Thank you. And if I may follow up on the question for the youth being involved in there, and I see there is a comment about involving the younger generation, as noted here. Can you elaborate just a little bit farther on what your take or what you took away from their comments from that meeting?
I got this. Okay. Actually, there was a great idea that came out of that meeting from the senior group that was there. Most of them were seniors. They talked about having like a kind of a mentor program where they like get a list of kids on a list and a list of seniors that would like to play, and then kind of have a mentor golfer youth relationship, because a lot of times some of these kids don't have parents that can play during the day because they're working or something like that, and all the retired guys are like, yeah, that'd be fun to take some youth out there. So we are going to implement that this coming summer. I thought it was an awesome idea, and we're going to definitely be using that this summer.
Terrific. And I know there's some other questions I have for you, but I can do that offline. But can you address any concerns from the other divisions that you have within the Parks Department, such as the Roosevelt Park Recreation Center, tennis, racquetball, et cetera? Is there any other outstanding concerns? I didn't see it in the minutes, so.
No, we really haven't had any concerns regarding the increases for any of the other recreational facilities. Usually just the golf fee increases draw the most attention.
Very good. Thank you. And I know I've got some other questions for you offline, so thank you. I'll yield.
Richie, we'll go to Alderwoman Drew. And I still have no motion on the floor,
Let's see.
if you feel like.
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. I guess my question goes to another area, and that is we had the turf war with the cross-country skiers last year on the courses, and I think there might be a revenue stream there that we're missing, and maybe you guys, just as a suggestion, could look into that. Maybe it's just a donation box or something like that, where your suggested rate for an afternoon of cross-country is $5, and have a lockbox or something like that. So people, I don't expect you to have staff out there all the time. That would really negate the entirety of trying to charge for it, because you wouldn't make any money. But if you just had somewhere where people could do a free will donation to be out on the golf course. I don't know that the little ski poles do. I don't know anything about this sport, but I don't know if it does any damage, or maybe it's a good aeration system. But for me, I just would like you guys to look into that a little bit more, since it's going to happen. People seem to enjoy that in the wintertime, and we should make that available to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman Drew. We do have a motion on the floor for approval by Drew and a second by Nordstrom. Brenda, if you didn't catch that, do I have any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Item number 21 carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We are now on non-consent items 22 through 30. I do have a number of speaker request forms, and we will take them in numerical order. Item number 23 first, I have Jerry Eisenbrun. If you would approach the podium, state your name and business for the record, we would appreciate it. Thank you, sir. And you have 3 minutes.
I am Jerry Eisenbrun with Upper Deck Architects. We are the owner's representative for we're in the process of constructing a new highway department in the current location for Pennington County Highway. With that, we're in the process of getting a building permit for the owner or for the contractor, and one of the requests is for an additional sidewalk be added in front of along the frontage. As we know, there's Highway 79, there's a small median, and then there's a service road in front of those businesses across that place before you get to the property lines. And I have some photos. I'm not sure how I show these up here on the screen if it does that. But what I've done is I've traveled all the way from St. Pat Street all the way past the current, and I have hard copies too, if that helps.
Get you some support here.
Does that help? I got those if I need them.
I'll pass those out.
Okay. So what I've got in front of me is I've got an aerial map of the entire Highway 79 area in front of this frontage area. And then I've taken some close-up pictures of businesses along the street. I can tell you all the way from St. Pat Street, which is about 2.5 miles away, there's only 2 businesses along this street, or along this highway, that have sidewalks. One is Arnie's Pressure Wash, which is on the east side of the interstate On the west side of the interstate, it is right there at the corner of Highway 79 and Fairmont. Of that, there's no crosswalk access. As you get closer to the business, and I know that's an undeveloped area west of the interstate and north of Fairmont. However, when you get south of Fairmont, there are either parking lots, fences, or retaining walls right up to the service wall that hinder the construction of a sidewalk in this area. In other words, it's a dead end on both streets. And so that's part of what the request is to ask for a waiver in constructing this sidewalk along this frontage road of Highway 79.
Okay, thank you, sir. And we may call on you when we get to that item.
Thank you.
Item number 24. Kyle, would you like to speak on that one? You know the drill.
Hello, Kyle Trelor with KTM Design Solutions. I just wanted to make a quick note on item 24. We are requesting that the denial be overturned on behalf of the applicant. Basically, we feel that the rural section that exists on Dias Avenue as it sits today is adequate for the uses presented, and because of the fact that the street was essentially this used to be the main access onto the interstate, has since been abandoned at the interstate. It's a dead end portion of the street. We expect low traffic volumes, and it would present a significant expense to upgrade it to a true commercial section, whereas the section that it is currently constructed at is adequate. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And on items 27, 28, and 29, Alderwoman Modrick, did you want to speak? After the neighbor. Yes, we can certainly do that. We'll go to Corey Schaefer on the same items. 27, 28, and 29, please, sir. I'm sorry. We're just going to play musical speakers. Yes, Carissa, you are welcome to approach the podium. State your name and address for the record, please, if you would. And Carissa is speaking on items 27, 28, and 29 as well.
Okay, Carissa Steiger, 4418 Duckhorn Street. And I think he had a video he was going to play first. And this is just a video just kind of giving you an idea of our area right now. And it was actually a July runoff. So it will show a rainstorm during a July storm. So you can kind of see how the water is flowing down the street before I start my presentation. Oh, do you want me to do something?
Nope.
Okay.
Anything.
And you can see that a lot of our neighbors have already put in some pathways to kind of help the water flow down, lots of rock. But this is what we're looking at as far as water flow and the amount of water that is coming down. It's not a great amount of water that's coming down by any means. It's not flooding up in any path. It's not hitting fences or anything right now. And this was quite a substantial storm, and you can see it a little bit into this video in just a second. How much water is in that rock and stuff, but it's obviously flowing down the hill in the way in the path that it was designed to. So that was just the basic illustration. You can go ahead and turn it off. I just wanted to thank you for your time, and I know Ms. Modrick can attest to the time and effort that we've put into researching this and coming up with our presentation for you guys today. We purchased our home 2 years ago. We have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and their safety is our biggest concern with this whole problem. The development is beautiful, and we decided it was the best place to raise our boys. We had an instant concern, though, that there was no playground, school, or any place for the kids to play within walking distance in any direction. We had a discussion with our builder to build a 6-foot privacy fence to help solve this problem. We brought in over 5 tons of rock and built our own playground, all of which is in this easement. and on the only flat part of our property. And our neighbors have taken similar measures to do the same thing. And basically that was to help with all the construction that's going on right now. There's tons of construction workers, big equipment around us, and kids running around and not having those fenced-in play areas is a big concern of ours. I hope that you had a chance to look through the dozens of letters that were submitted to the city, to the Public Works Department and the Planning and Zoning Commission with our neighbors that had the same concerns and issues with that as well. So then we are basically preparing ourselves for the worst, ripping down our fence and losing a lot of our backyard. So we talked to the city. When we contacted the city asking where the ordinance was, how it was defined, and how it is enforced, we were issued the following responses. The easement is in place for the 100-year flood. There's no specific ordinance that spells out, and the definition is less formal and more practical. And staff considers this easement to handle the runoff of 2 or more lots, but there was no document that we could go to reference or find the criteria for this. And they also informed us that the amount of water flow didn't really matter with their restrictions. We also have some plots that are on there that I've linked to the agenda that show that we were under the understanding that it was a minor drainage easement. And if you look on our individual plots, that's what it actually says, the ones that we were given at closing. So we're having a hard time with that because that's what we assumed. We realized that it's not the city's fault that we bought a lot with a drainage easement, and we bring forth the land plots and emails only with the intention that we didn't mean to break any rules here. We thought we were following the rules, and find out that we didn't a couple years later was kind of hard to swallow for us. We do feel, though, we have come up with a compromise, and that KTM Designs, actually Kyle, he's came up with a couple solutions to help us solve that, and we are hoping that you will consider option number 3 to raise our fences, but not have to move our fences in any. So we're hoping for that, and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mrs. Steiger. We'll now go to Corey Schaefer on the same items.
Good afternoon. My name is Corey Schaefer. I reside at 4370 Duckhorn Street. First of all, I want to thank your time for at least hearing our case. With a little bit of this is going to be a repeat of what Carissa said. However, going forward and stemming off of what Carissa said, the application that was available online was an option for us that was pointed out to us. We took advantage of that option. We were assisted by the city in completing this application to vacate the easement or come up with some type of solution or variance to this easement. That being said, notifying utility companies, paying a certain amount of fee for the application process, and to maybe conclude any curiosity about the fee and the amount of applications you received. One application is for a group of houses. So if there's 5 houses together that coincide without being split, that would be one application. If there's a split in a house and then it goes on for 10 more houses, that's one more application. So that may, if there's any curiosity as to why there's only 3 applications, that would be why. When meeting with Vicki Fisher initially, who assisted in the application process and provided direction going forward, I was advised if I had an engineer approve the vacation of easement or some type of variance thereof, or develop a plan that fit all parties involved for the sake of us, our families, our financial matters going forward, our investment into this community and house, this city, that's all I would need. Vicki also suggested that I get a hold of Kyle from KTM, who spoke, and who is one of or the original developer of this property. This was wrote down to me on a yellow Post-it that I was in. I know Yanni Georges, who's a realtor, a common used realtor out in this area. I contacted him for assistance going forward. He then in return notified Kyle, and Kyle has been extremely helpful in this matter, to include Lisa as well. Kyle has developed 3 plans or formulated 3 plans and have presented it to us. We are and wish to pursue Plan Number 3, as Carissa stated. We hope that the city takes this into consideration. If you have any questions about the development or the plans going forward, Kyle's here for any questions in particular to the formulation or engineering of the restructuring and the 3 plans that he has presented that would be feasible and could possibly fit all parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. And we will go to Alderwoman Modrick on items 27, 8, and 9.
Lisa Modrick, Ward 1, representing our constituents. And I want to thank you, Madam Chair, as well as our City Council on Public Works, for taking a review on this and really putting some thought to this seriously on the after effects of what this neighborhood has before them. They've done a tremendous amount of research. I know their paperwork is about 3 inches high, really trying to resolve what the comedy of errors that aren't funny that had happened to them as first-time buyers, as well as what they could do to come up with the solutions that would work in their neighborhood. There's a number of neighbors here right now. Maybe they could stand. There's a number of them representing their homes. For those that could get off work, others are already still at home. It is an entire neighborhood that is affected by this. As I understand it in the research that's been done, major easement was designed in this neighborhood in the plotting stages, but once the neighborhood actually developed, it no longer maintained a major need. On the video that you saw just past the rock, there was a slight trickle of water that was running down that easement, and that was after, as you could see, about golf ball size hail and a massive rainstorm. There was very little water runnage in there. I also went out there watching for the right time of weather, as I happen to know this weather guy, and when there was a really strong storm, I also went out to investigate it myself and saw the same effects. It was a trickle running down there after a major rain. So the streets were flooding, but this drainage ditch was not absorbing the water because the need of it wasn't there. It was actually an overuse for a major drainage. So I saw that as a resolution perhaps to move to a minor easement, or in the application process, there's no other choice for the neighborhood to do but a vacate of easement. There's no other boxes you can check. So they came before you with a vacate of easement, but as well also searched for solutions that would be recommended by the engineer that was the original on the process. And he is here, Kyle's here. If you do have any questions, he will be standing by for questions later. So in order to save these homeowners thousands of dollars of improvements and reinvestments to their home, as well as a daycare that needs the income, this is driving the income, that needs to have safety of fencing and children's play zones, and all the other neighborhood residents that are being represented by this request, it would be very assistive to them if you could help solve this so that they don't run into financial burden. If there's anything that can be done to include not just taking one of the alternatives, again, designed by the engineer, but perhaps even attaching a memorandum of agreement or understanding or a WARP or anything that, if the city feels would have responsibility for this neighborhood, could actually put it back on the homeowners of the homeowners association so that they could move on now from the 3 months of absolute distress for their home and the work that they've done for the safety of their children and the safety of their neighborhood, and allow them to continue living in this absolutely beautifully designed neighborhood, well cared for, and keep them living there happily in Rapid City. As far as going from a major to a minor, that's 10 foot for a major on each side, 8 foot for a minor on each side, and actually their survey showed that they had an 8 foot, so that's where some of the information that they got as early home buyers came in, that they were within the regulations of the fencing, and that survey is the one that showed the 8 foot. On maintenance side, all the neighborhood has been responsible for what's behind their fencing and their yards, as this is still part of their property. It's just got an easement on it. So they've cared and maintained it. And when Carissa took that video, there wasn't a neighbor that was asked, oh, by the way, we're taking a home video today, clean up the back, because it's already well maintained and manicured. But even if the city needed to do some type of maintenance back there, it would be similar to a minor easement maintenance, so it shouldn't create any problem at all to maintain it if the city needed to. But the neighborhood has shown the responsibility of that because it is a well-groomed neighborhood, very prideful neighborhood, and I would hope we can consider a resolution and a solution without a flat denial and take care of this entire neighborhood that's involved in this request. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll now close public comment on items 22 through 30. And we'll go to item number 22. Welcome back. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. We appreciate this opportunity to visit with you all for a few minutes this afternoon. My name is John Less. I'm a traffic engineer with the Department of Transportation's Road Design Office in Pierre. And with me today is John Sumala, who is the Rapid City Region traffic engineer, who will be presenting after me. We split this up into two parts. I'm going to present first on giving you an overview of the traffic signal warrants that we use to determine when a traffic signal goes in anywhere on the state system. And then John's going to pick up when I stop and go into a little more detail on the intersection of Elkvale and East Minnesota Street, which had been a topic of discussion for probably about 2 years with the city, with the development happening out there and the desire to have a signal go in. And John will give you history and how we got to where we're at today, which is warranting the signal there. What I hope to do this in the few minutes that I have is just give you kind of a background and understanding of where traffic signal warrants come from and why they were developed, and give you a conceptual picture of the groupings that the warrants fall under. There's 3 broad categories that the 9 warrants fall under. I want to go over those. And then I want to walk through each of the 9 warrants with you, but I'm not going to go into numbers, so don't worry. That's be boring enough for me to go through it, and I can imagine having to listen to it. If at the end of either what I present or what John presents, if you have more questions, our contact information will be on the last slide. As well as at the city, you have resources within the engineering services division. There's a couple qualified people that are well versed in this just as well as we are, and I'm sure they would be glad to help you with any questions. If you haven't yet heard in your legislative careers, somewhere along the line you're going to hear the term MUTCD, or some engineer is going to throw out the term the manual says, and it's usually in the context of saying why we can't do what someone wants to do. So it's usually, unfortunately, it's usually adversarial when you first learn about it. But the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is it's a Federal Highways Administration publication, and it's the national standard for any traffic control devices installed on public roads. And traffic control devices include signs, pavement markings, traffic signals, crosswalks where pedestrian crosswalks go in, railroad crossings, anything that communicates information to the road user falls under that manual. And it covers any public street, whether it's a cul-de-sac with 5 homes on it to an interstate freeway. The one book covers it all, and that's the source in the United States. Even with the Great Depression and the trouble of the early 30s, automobile use in the United States exploded. And there were a few visionary people that decided, we need to get together and kind of formalize how things get done on the roads that are open to the public, because we can see it's happening. And fortunately, after the post-war boom, their vision is really one of those little-known footnotes in history, because it was very important what they did. And so what they did in 1935, they published the first edition of the manual, and 81 years later, the two goals of the manual remain the same. They wanted people, if someone was driving in Florida, they want that person, when they drive to Oregon, to basically feel the same comfort level on the public road. Doesn't matter what state you're in, what city you're in, you know, the goal is to make everything feel the same, which has the benefit of being a safer roadway. And the second goal is to keep traffic moving. And we'll talk, when I get into the warrants, we'll talk a little more about that. And even though 81 years, the goals are the same, the manual is constantly evolving. They come out with a new edition every couple of years, and new ideas come into play and are experimented with and get adopted eventually. I'll give you an example of one such thing is the flashing yellow arrow for left turns that there's a few around town now. That started out as someone had an idea thinking that was going to make people making a left turn be a little more careful and not turn in front of other people. It went through an experimentation process, and then eventually in the new manual it was adopted as a acceptable practice. Like any federal document, there are things in there that people will not like. No one's going to agree 100% on something. So what happens if you don't like something in the manual and you decide, I'm not going to do it? There are no MUTCD police, and no grand jury is going to indict you if you don't follow the book. The authority of the manual comes in two different avenues. For someone like me, you know, at the first slide I had my name and a couple letters after the name. Those letters mean that I'm licensed as an engineer and also certified as a traffic engineer. And when I get those licenses, I promise to follow the applicable standards and live up to a code of ethics. So for me to go against the manual, I am running the risk of losing my license and my certification, and that means my livelihood. So engineers are pretty reluctant, and that's why when either a citizen or elected official or whoever sometimes hears that we say, nope, the manual says no, that's why. We have a lot at stake. We can also be guilty, just like a medical person, of malpractice. So I don't want to lose my job, and I don't want to get sued, so I like the manual. For a public agency, it's a risk management decision, and sooner or later, every agency I've worked at does this. You know, they decide they're going to put a stop sign in even though it's not warranted. We'll want a signal to go in even though it's not warranted. It's just a risk management decision, and everybody does it. You know, I worked 8 years as a traffic engineer for the city here. I can tell you where all the skeletons are buried, so if you want to know, just ask. But you know, if something happens and someone, finds out it wasn't warranted, it's a risk. You can be exposed to liability. Currently, there's 9 traffic signal warrants, and they fall under 3 broad categories. One is just the amount of traffic at an intersection. One is safety-related issues, and the other is special cases. The warrants are not the final word in deciding whether a signal goes in. The manual says that in addition to the warrants, an engineering study has to be conducted. So it's possible that the warrants could be met and the signal might not go in, or it's possible that no warrants are met and yet the engineer decides, nope, we really do need a signal. So the warrants are a tool, but they're not the last word. So I'll just walk through the 3 categories real quick. And again, no numbers. There's 4 warrants that fall under the traffic volume side of things. First, warrant 1A and 2 are looking at the total amount of traffic at an intersection. And give you an example, an intersection like Campbell and Omaha, for example, would be somewhere where the volume was just so much on both roads that a signal is needed. 1B looks at how long it takes someone on a side street to get out. Example of this is Texas and 5th Street. Not a lot of traffic on Texas, but they have to wait a while to get out without the signal, so that's why that was warranted. And 1C looks at a combination of the 3 preceding ones. All of them take into account the number of lanes, the speed, and combinations thereof, and there's population considerations as well. And all the thresholds are established by that committee that, you know, writes the book. So those thresholds change over time, and, you know, like I said before, they're under evaluation constantly. Under the umbrella of safety warrants includes a pedestrian warrant. That's just when you have a lot of pedestrians crossing the street. That's rarely met in South Dakota. Number 5, warrant number 5 looks at school crossings. So if you have school children crossing, Nordby and Main Street on the west side is a school crossing signal, and those will typically flash in the summertime. Number 7 is crash experience, and I'm going to talk a little more in detail about that. Number 9 is the railroad crossing warrant. That's when you have a street that's close to a crossing. Probably the closest example in the city is St. Patrick and St. Joseph. Back to number 7, the crash experience warrant. Any crash, if you're in a crash, it's a major event. I mean, crashes can result in injury or death or just property damage. But even if it's just property damage, it is a huge inconvenience to deal with a crash. So whenever a crash occurs, that's, you know, natural at an unsignalized location, people say, we want a signal. Well, the facts of life are that any intersection that doesn't have a signal can experience crashes and will experience crashes. Even at signals, there are crashes. And even though, you know, engineers come across as hard-hearted, there has to be a threshold, because if we put a signal in everywhere we had a crash, there would be signals everywhere. And again, going back to one of the goals of efficiency, that is not very efficient. Under special cases, the peak hour warrant is meant for unique places like a stadium or event center where there's a huge slug of traffic coming out for a brief time. It's not often met in South Dakota, but a lot of times people try to justify it for developments and say, well, you know, we're going to have this many people coming out in this peak hour, we need a signal. Well, shopping centers and doctors' offices aren't unique, and so we don't put in signals for those. The coordinated signal warrant and the roadway network warrant are, I've never used them in my career. They're for big metropolitan areas, and I can't see in my lifetime applying it anywhere in South Dakota. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Sumala, the region traffic engineer, and he'll talk about Elkvale and East Minnesota Street.
Thank you, Mr. Less.
As John mentioned, I'm John Sumala. I'm the acting Rapid City Region Traffic Engineer for the South Dakota DOT, and I'll tell you a little bit about the specific intersection of US 16B, also known as Elkvale Road, and East Minnesota Street. A little bit of history on this intersection. In 2007, the construction of Elkvale Road through this intersection was completed. And then in the time frame from 2010 to 2012, East Minnesota Street was completed, I believe, first on the south side or east side, and then in 2010, and then in 2012 on the west or north side of the intersection. In 2011, new subdivision construction began in the nearby area of the intersection, and in 2013, construction began on the apartments complex in that area. Turning movements counts were taken at the intersection on April 24th of 2013, again June 10th of 2014, April 14th of this year, and also August 24th of this year. The results of signal warrant studies, which John Les was talking about, the first three came up that a signal was not warranted at this intersection. However, on August 24th, 2016, the counts showed that a signal is warranted. Looking at that August 24th study, looking at the different warrants that John Les talked about, for the safety warrants, for the pedestrians, school crossing, and railroad crossing, all of those were not applicable, as none of those items were in the area of this intersection. And the crash experience that he talked about was also not satisfied, even with the recent rally time crash that occurred there. Of the special cases that he talked about, none of the three, the peak hour, the coordinated signal system, or the roadway network, were applicable to this intersection. Of the traffic volume warrants, the 8-hour vehicular volume, the delay on the side road, and the combination of the two were all not satisfied based on the counts performed. However, the 4-hour vehicular volume was satisfied, and we'll look at what exactly that involves. This warrant is applied where the volume of the intersecting traffic is the principal reason to consider installing a traffic signal, and it's satisfied when, for any 4 hours of the day, the plotted points representing the total vehicles per hour on both approaches of the major road and the corresponding vehicles per hour on the higher volume approach of the minor road, for one direction only, fall above the appropriate curve of the given figure in the MUTCD, which John also discussed. And for that count, 4 hours of the existing traffic volumes were above the appropriate curve, and therefore the warrant was satisfied. Here's a look at what that curve looks like. On the bottom there, that's the number of vehicles per hour on the major street, which is US 16B or Elkvale Road. And then on the left side there is the number of vehicles per hour on the minor street, only on the east or south side. And here is the actual data, and the blue line there is the one that we're looking at. So any point that falls above that is an hour, in which case both of the vehicles per hour fell above that line. And it looks like there's a lot more than 4. However, these are broken down by every 15-minute increments. So one of the dots could go from 7 in the morning to 8 in the morning, and another dot is from 7:15 to 8:15. Obviously, those overlap, so we can't count them both. However, there are 4 of those that are completely unique hours. This concludes John and I's presentation.
Thank you, sir. Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you guys for the report, and I'm extremely excited to see that we're going to be getting signals at this intersection. If I may, could I ask Dale Tech a question?
Yes, sir.
Dale, the original lights for this project were were purchased through a TIF, and it's my understanding now that you're looking for a motion because some of the specifications have changed. We're needing funding to buy a few different components. So could you tell me specifically what kind of motion you're looking for us to go forward so that we can proceed with this signal?
Yes, I'll try to be brief here. The project, the subdivision project was, a lot of the public improvements were funded by a TIF, and some of the equipment for that traffic signal was purchased, pre-purchased, and then put into storage. It did not include, obviously, the installation of that. So the city's going to have to install the signal. Therefore, there's going to be costs incurred for the footings and associated conduits and junction boxes to be able to wire the system. In addition, when the signal equipment was purchased, some of the mast arms for the signals over Elkville Road, the standard has changed for that. Therefore, those signal arms won't work or won't be approved for installation, so the city's going to have to update those to meet the current standard. In addition, the leg of the intersection on the either north or west side was added after the subdivision was approved, so there was no equipment purchased for that. So that's additional equipment that the city will have to find to install. So my recommendation would be for this committee and ultimately the council to acknowledge this report and then to ask staff to bring back a recommendation for the installation of this signal along with funding recommendation.
Thank you. Those are the funding source was my next question. So I guess I can't make the motion, but I encourage that so we don't delay this any further. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Estes. We'll go to Alderman Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll make a motion to acknowledge the report today and move to and direct staff to come up with some solutions on funding. But may I retain the floor and ask Dale Tech a question,
Once
please?
you have a second, yes, you may.
Thank you. Dale, so I'm glad to see that we might get this light in. I think public safety is number one, and I'm happy about that. I am concerned that we purchase things that we can't use for large dollar amounts. Is this a common occurrence? You said there's a traffic light we purchased once upon a time. Now we can't use it.
Yes, I'll say that's the difficulty with some of the TIFs that have been approved in the past where they've purchased the equipment. They're under a 5-year timeline where they've got to expend the TIF funds. The signal was not warranted in that 5 years, therefore it couldn't be put up. So there's at least a couple of cases where we're going to have that issue where equipment was purchased or has been purchased, yet there's no way to have the TIF pay for the installation of the signal. That is going to come back to the city to find a way to get that done, and that's the situation here.
So this situation is unavoidable. It's going to happen from time to time.
Correct. There are some exceptions. John Lass had indicated there was a signal installed at 5th in Texas. Well, that was a project totally undertaken by the city. It was city growth over time at that intersection finally warranted a signal. The city had to come up to fund both the installation and the purchase of the equipment to get that signal installed. So, the pre-purchase of equipment through a TIF is not a perfect thing, yet it helps in the ultimate installation that equipment sitting there ready to be installed, but there's other costs that come when you have to install it.
Okay. Thank you. Yield the floor.
Thank you. I do have a motion on the floor for acknowledgement as well as directing staff to come back with funding options for this project, traffic signal at this location. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are now on item number 23, which is an item requesting from Pennington County for a variance to waive the requirement to install sidewalk per Rapid City Ordinance 12.08.060 along the Campbell Street Service Road. The recommendation is for denial, and we do have Jerry Eisenbraun here to address questions if needed. Alderman Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may start it off with the adopting staff's recommendation to deny the appeal.
I have a motion to deny
Second.
and a second by Alderwoman Drew. You may retain the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if it's all right with the applicant, are they in the room? Yeah, please come forward. I was interested in some of the comments that you made about the location of the sidewalks. Can you recite again to me about if we require this installation of this sidewalk, what circumstances or what the negative impact will be placed upon you, other than cost?
Cost has never been the issue of why we're asking for their waiver. The sidewalk's not going to go anywhere. On the south side of the street, you have the Rapid City Area School District warehouse, and their fencing on that south side, north side of their property, south side of the Pennington counties, goes right up to the service road. The sidewalk's not going to go anywhere. On the north side, as I travel north, the next property is the Juvenile Services Center, and that has a tiered retaining wall down to the street. So then, therefore, again, you cannot go anywhere with a sidewalk other than everybody would have to walk on the service road itself. I just don't see in this area, in this business district area, that a sidewalk is warranted for any of these businesses. The nearest residence, and is, like I said, the farther north, as you get north of Fairmont Boulevard, where it's undeveloped yet, I can see that as eventually are requiring the sidewalk, but there is no pedestrian traffic along Highway 79. And so at the north and the south end of the sidewalk, it just doesn't make sense for us to install the sidewalk when it's not going to be used and it's not going to go anywhere.
Thank you for that comment, and I appreciate your input on it. However, I'm getting comments from other groups, other people within the community, and meaning the city at large, that they would like to see sidewalks being installed. So just to let you know that there is other people that are interested in seeing sidewalks installed. So if I can direct a question to the interim Public Works Director, Dale Tech.
Yes, sir.
Dale, just to give us a little recap on the staff's rationale for the denial of the waiver.
Staff's recommendation is to install the sidewalk. There is a mobile home park that's located south of the site, a convenience store located at the intersection of Fairmont and Campbell Street. We've got to start somewhere with sidewalk installation. Currently, those people in that area walk up and down the service road. That's a less than ideal condition to have people out walking in lanes of traffic. I believe staff's position was reaffirmed by the discussion that we've had recently about sidewalk installation, and that it, at the time of building permit, regardless of what's going on, the sidewalk needs to be installed. We need to take that first step to get sidewalks installed in corridors. Yeah, today the petitioner might be correct that it may not get used much, but in the future, hopefully a sidewalk network can be built along that corridor and make our community a true multimodal community.
Thank you. I don't need to go on any further, so I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. I have no other speaker lights on, so I will take a quick point of privilege and ask, Mr. Tech, I often see people walking north of the convenience store. There are definite wear paths there. Just an undeveloped field at this point. If sidewalks were to continue, what would happen around the overpass? Where would pedestrian traffic go?
That's a good question. Oakland Street intersects Campbell Street on the south side of the overpass. If there's a connection made there, they can get into the neighborhood. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. I believe there's a service road there, once again, on the side of the adjacent to the overpass. That sidewalk network be built on that service road to get people around the overpass and then further north on Camel Street and ultimately to St. Joe and St. Patrick.
On both sides of the highway?
I would anticipate just on the west side. The east side with the railroad property, I believe that's going to be some difficult pedestrian access in the future over there. Who knows what the future is going to bring 40, 50, 60 years from now, if the railroad would move at some point in time, or if there would be other options to provide that pedestrian access.
Thank you, sir. I do have a motion on the floor to deny this request on item number 23. Is there any further discussion from the committee? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item number 24 is an appeal by KTM Design Solutions, Inc. of an exception request denial to waive the requirement to construct public improvements in Dias Avenue. And again, we do have Kyle Trelor here to answer questions if need be. I'll turn it over to the committee. I have a motion to approve.
The denial. Is that how to say it?
You're denying the appeal?
No.
Or you're?
I'm denying
the appeal. Okay. There's a motion to deny the appeal by Drew, and did I hear a second?
I'll second.
And I had a second by Nordstrom. Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. May I ask Dale Tech a couple questions?
Yes, sir.
Regarding Dale, it's my understanding on this section, it's a rural section and it got cut off because it used to be the way to get over the interstate back in the day. Their proposed plat shows a future approach or an approach off this street, is that right?
I believe they're proposing access off of
Access. And so if you look at the center of the street, to the east is this parcel, and then to the west is Great Western that's been there for years, and then a piece of land that was platted with Rapid Chevrolet.
That's correct.
And when Rapid Chevrolet's plat was done, they had to sign an agreement to do their half. A warp, so that if we found somebody to do the other side, they would have to come to the table.
That's correct.
So when a warp's done, if there was a warp on both sides, does that mean that we have to come up with a funding source to do it, and then it's an assessment project, or if there's a warp, do they have to come up with the cash at the time?
No, if there's a warp, then it falls entirely, in my opinion, on the city to develop the project, to fund the project, to build the project, and then assess the cost to the adjoining property owners.
Okay, because that is one of the concerns I have is with all the warps is going forward, is that's kind of the way I understood it, is that we end up financing these improvements and assessing them, and which could be problematic as the city goes forward. So I don't think I have any other questions at this time. Thank you.
Do you have any other questions, comments? Mr. Nordstrom, please.
I'm not sure where to direct this question to, and if I may, I'll start off with the attorney's office to clarify a little bit about, maybe share with us a little bit about that history with the old warp, this next warp, or how that process is working, because the way I'm reading this is that there is an older warp on there that goes back to another business or another agency. So have you got a little bit of a history on this, or is this best directed to Public Works Director? Dale Tech? It's very complicated, and
well,
if you can...
Yeah, I'll try to shed some light on that. Dias Avenue, existing right-of-way, existing rural road section, the Rapid Chevrolet site, when it was subdivided and improvements were made on it, it was acknowledged that Dias Avenue is a rural road section, and a warp was granted, so they did not have to make improvements to that. So there is a warp that exists on the west side of Dias Avenue. A waiver right to protest future improvements on that stretch. So today, we've got somebody proposing to subdivide property on the east side of the road, and they've made a request to not do any improvements. They're not requesting a warp or anything, they're just requesting to not do the improvements. Staff's recommendation was to deny that and also require them to make the improvements and then possibly have the city partner with them to get the road built to city criteria, and then to assess the cost for the west side back to the people that had agreed to that waiver of right to protest that assessment. So in a nutshell, that's the history, and that's where we're at, and that's what staff's recommendation is. I'll reiterate, the applicant is requesting not to do any improvements.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dale. If I may, I'll yield the floor, and if something else comes up, I'll come back.
Certainly. I guess my question as chair would be, Alderwoman Drew, did your motion include the full scope of staff's recommendation? Or is it just denying the appeal?
Well,
if you wouldn't mind speaking into the mic, thank you.
Since staff made the recommendation to denial to waive the requirement to construct public improvements, that's what it says here. That's what my motion is.
Okay.
Okay? Does that clear that up? I mean, they're not going to make improvements, and then the staff denied that.
It does. And Dale, please feel free to wave your hand or chime in if I have this wrong. But my understanding is that the motion as it stands, if we were to pass this, it puts 100% of the burden on this developer for both sides of the road, for both sides of improvement. If we were to take staff's recommendation, then they're only paying their fair share, and we come up with a way to get those improvements done, and the rightful property owner's paying for those improvements. Is that accurate?
That is accurate,
Thank
yes.
you, sir. Mr. Estes. You want me to come back to you? I would like one, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I make a substitute motion that we deny this appeal and that we ask staff to come back with a funding source so that the city can do does the project get designed, the city will come up with the appropriate funding to do the west side and be reimbursed through the WARP for that portion that the WARP covers, and only require the developer to pay their fair share on the east side.
Do I have a second?
Second. I can support that.
Thank you, I do. Brenda, did you catch all that? Thank you. We do have a new motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion or questions for Mr. Treloar? Seeing no further discussion, all in favor of the current motion on the floor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We are now on to item number 25, which is an appeal of denial of request for exception to not dedicate additional collector street right-of-way along Luna Avenue. I think Kyle just really likes us. We should open him an office here. Mr. Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This may get amended as well, but I'm going to start off with the motion to uphold staff's decision to deny the request for additional collector street for the right-of-way on Luna Avenue.
Okay, so the motion is to deny the appeal.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Do I have a second? Thank you, sir. Mr. Nordstrom, do you still wish to retain the floor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reason I'm kind of hesitant on doing this, and I just need a little bit of clarification, because of the property's owner understanding of this, they are using the word, and maybe I'm using it inappropriately, but the word that keeps coming up for me is that they are donating the property back to the city so that we can have access to the right-of-way, access to utility easements, et cetera, et cetera. The word I'm cautious of using is taking, and that's that's the area of concern for me. So if I can address that question to Public Works Director Dale Tech, using the
Heck,
word,
did you catch that?
using the word taking and how we apply that. Thank you.
Just go over how we acquire right-of-way and
Yes.
Well, we have, as part of our ordinances for the subdivision of property, certain criteria must be met. The criteria changes from time to time. When this property was initially platted, sometime in the mid-2000s, I believe, there was a criteria in place for the width of right-of-way that needed to be dedicated. That criteria has changed. It is now wider. With what has been built in the right-of-way that is there, which was improvements funded by, I believe, a TIF number 56, there isn't enough room in that right-of-way for what needs to be installed there. Instead of a 24-foot paved surface that should have been installed with the 60-foot right-of-way that was originally platted, they built 36-foot of pavement, 3 lanes. 2 20-inch water mains were installed on the east side of the road. Those are significant infrastructure that supplies water to quite a large area, exists next to the road. One of them is either right near or right underneath the property line. So if something were to happen and the city were to have to go in there in the future, we'd have to obtain an easement at a cost probably from that property owner to be able to work on that water transmission main. Back to your question though, it is appropriate for the city to require the dedication of right-of-way per the standards adopted by the city. So I'm not going to form an opinion as to whether it's a taking or not, but that is the requirement that the city has historically operated under, and I believe most municipalities in the country operate the same way.
One more question, Madam Chair. The way I'm going to address this question has to do with precedent, and we, the city of Rapid City, has already done something comparable to this. So we've established a precedent.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Nordstrom. Alderman Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dale, I have a question for you. So that was an amended, those improvements were paid for through a TIF that was amended. It was part of the Rushmore Crossing TIF, if I can, and that's probably not the most important question to be asked today, but is that fair?
I believe that to be the case, yes.
Okay, so, but was Luna built by developers of this vacant land, or this land that we're talking about?
That's correct.
Okay. So were all these streets and utilities and such designed by the city or by the developer's engineer?
They were designed by the developer's engineer.
Okay. So have we gotten a set of plans? I understand. So we'd got a set of plans that showed a cross-section of what the right-of-way is, and it showed the 3 lanes of street, curb gutter, sidewalks, sewer line, and these 2 gigantic water lines?
That's correct.
Okay, and we approved them. I mean, I'm not talking, but apparently we approved that at that design.
That's correct.
It's okay. Now, may I ask Kyle Treelor a question?
Yes, sir.
Kyle, you didn't speak earlier, but are you here can I ask you questions on behalf of this?
I don't speak for the owner on this one, so I could potentially answer some questions as to the history, but
okay.
Beyond that,
no, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Sorry about that. Well, I have an opinion. Sometimes it takes 2 people to make a mistake, you know, and if we approved that way, then we approved it that way. But one of the things I am amazed at sitting here with my time on the council is how much time we spend. I mean, this needs to get resolved. And right away, they can't sell right away. But in my mind, if we take more right away now, after we've already approved it, we're taking value away from those guys. It should have been this should have been hammered out at the time. So what I think we should do, because we need to reserve the right to be able to go in there, you know, we're dealing with the owners now, but 10 years from now, there's going to be different owners and different people, and if that water line bursts, we don't have the ability to go on there and work on it. So I think would be more reasonable would be, in my mind, to ask them to grant us an easement, because then they could still put the parking lot on there. They can, you know, it's sellable land. It's part of the square footage that they can sell to a buyer, but to require them to grant us an easement so that we can maintain those utilities and not take away deedable land through the right-of-way process. I see that as middle ground, and because you know, probably should have been a wider right-of-way. And we go around right now, and we've got new projects, and we've got people that go buy right-of-way for us. And I see where staff is, and we need to have the ability to maintain those utilities. But we kind of, and it's probably different staff, but we probably played a part in it. So I guess what I would support would be if somebody would make a motion that we request an easement, a utility maintenance easement, rather than additional right-of-way on this space. I yield, Madam Chair.
Question to Mr. Tech on? No, it is not. Mr. Nordstrom.
That'll be my question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
And then maybe if the city attorney can weigh in a little bit about what, if we did put an easement in that, what the consequences would be, or what the pros and cons would be of an easement. So may I start off with Dale Tech? Thank you. Hopefully you understand my question is, what does an easement do for us, or what does that do in general?
If the applicant is agreeable to granting an easement, it would have to be a specific easement for specific use, and that would be a utility easement for water mains, or a water utility easement. So that would grant the city the right to go in on that property if there is ever an issue in the future with that water main, without having to obtain either a right of entry or a temporary or permanent easement from that property owner at the time. So it would protect the city's interest in those water mains that exist there today.
Is there a value or a cost to the city on that part of that? Meaning, if we have to gain entrance into that, using the example of a water main break, is there a fee that we would have to pay to the property owner to get that easement?
In the future, yes. If we don't acquire something now, either additional right-of-way or work with the applicant to obtain an easement in lieu of the right-of-way, yes, I believe the city would have to purchase a future easement or right-of-way from whomever owns the property in the future.
Thank you. Is there anything from the city attorney's office, Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes, thank you. You know, right now, my understanding is that we could require the dedication of more right-of-way. What Alderman Estes is proposing is that in lieu of requiring more right-of-way, that we require, or that the city acquire, that the applicants, the waiver of that additional right-of-way be waived upon them granting an easement at no charge to the city. You know, my initial reaction was, well, a right-of-way is a easement too. They're both easements, but a right-of-way is a specific kind of easement that's more restrictive. If we did do a utility easement, I could see where it would protect the city's interest in being able to get in there and do work on the water mains. However, we could write the easement in a way it was less restrictive, and somebody could build a parking lot over it, which is, looking at the location, probably some landscaping, probably what they would want to do anyway. We'd have to hammer out the details of the easement, but we could certainly be less restrictive and allow the landowner to do more in a utility easement than perhaps we could in a right-of-way. So that may be a compromise that protects our interest and also is acceptable to the landowner.
If I may, just to follow up on that, would we, if we did that for this property, we would then have to do the same for adjoining property?
No, but if they were in a similar situation, I guess you certainly could handle it that way. I mean, I don't think there's any legal requirement that you handle it that way, but you will have set a precedent, and if somebody is in an adjacent property and they're developing and they want to go down the same path, it really wouldn't make a lot of sense to not follow that precedent.
Thank you. I believe that helps a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other speakers. I'd like to make a request that since the applicant is not here to speak to, I mean, we're negotiating his deal and trying to change this up, and he's not here to speak to that. If we could just get a substitute motion to continue this to council without recommendation, and then get a hold of the applicant in between now and then to discuss this, I think that might be in our best interest. Alderwoman Drew.
I'll make a motion to continue this to council without recommendation.
I have a substitute motion, Brenda, by Drew, and a second by Solomon to continue or roll this to council without recommendation so that we can explore some of this with the applicant. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Item carries. Mr. Solomon.
Make a motion that we call a 5-minute recess, please.
I have a motion for a 5-minute recess, which I would very greatly appreciate. Could I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. We'll recess just for 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Okay, just another couple seconds, everybody. This one? Nope. Thank you, everybody, for not revolting while we recess. This is probably the longest Public Works meeting we've had in a long time, and I will say it's the longest one on record for me as a chair.
I'm glad you're here.
But we'll get through this. Okay, we are now on item number 26, which is very generically titled the sidewalk discussion. And I do understand that there are the maps that we had requested are now linked, correct? And I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Tech.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was just going to throw this out, maybe an interest in trying to keep the meeting short. If you want to continue this discussion to another meeting, I think that would be appropriate. It's not like we're going to be out building sidewalks anytime soon, so I'll leave that up to the discretion of the committee if you want to consider this today or at a later date.
Thank you, Mr. Tech. And if you guys could see what I see, they all jumped in at the same time to jump on this one. Mr. Solomon, however, was first.
I will make a motion to continue this discussion to city council meeting, if that's
Probably
if
the
that
next
would work.
Public Works
Or public,
meeting.
excuse me, Public Works meeting, thank you. If I can get a second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second to continue this item to the next Public Works Committee meeting, just to help salvage some time. We do have a lot of people here waiting. Is there any discussion or opposition to that motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We'll continue item number 26 to the next Public Works meeting, which means Alderwoman Drew will get the gavel for that one. Yay. All right. Item number 27 is the Elks Crossing issue, request by Carissa Steiger from multiple appeals of staff's decision on vacations of easement. There's a whole host of property locations that are linked to the agenda, and I think it might behoove us to go ahead and consider 27 through 29 altogether. Reason being the explanation we were given earlier as to why there are 3 requests rather than 1 or 16, approximately. So if Joel doesn't have any problem with that, we'll go ahead and do that, and I will open up the floor. Mr. Solomon, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I'm going to try to see if I can get a second to move this on to City Council without recommendation for right now.
I'll second.
And if I may retain the floor.
Yes, sir.
And ask Dale Tech a question. Dale?
Yep.
Since Vicky's not here, so have we done this before in other areas where we've had easements and maybe had these challenges like these homeowners have had? Have we done this in recent history?
There are certainly examples of easements that have been vacated throughout the city over time. It's a common thing to do something that's this new, that has such a specific purpose, that had such a specific design to begin with, I would say is out of the ordinary. And staff doesn't support it and hasn't supported it since the initial discussions occurred. Assistant City Attorney Carla Cushman, I believe, had a late addition to the agenda. I would encourage you to read her letter, and I think that kind of spells out all the details that are pertinent from a staff's perspective regarding this requested vacation of drainage easement.
Another question on that. You know, one of the concerns was that the 20-foot easement may have been overkill for this area. Is that true? Can you tell me from your engineering background if that's the case?
I believe there's some confusion. Is there ever going to be 20 feet of water in width running through there? Absolutely not. However, for maintenance purposes, you cannot have a 3-foot wide easement and be able to maintain it. You'd be sending somebody in there with a shovel and a bucket in the future to try to maintain it, and that's just not practical to do. So on major drainage easement, the minimum required width is 20 feet, and that's to be able to get a bobcat or a backhoe in there in the future and be able to operate it without damaging the adjoining property. So the 20-foot standard has been a standard for many, many years in the city of Rapid City as far as minimum easement width.
Okay. And I don't know if this question's for you or if Joel can answer this, but are all the property owners requesting this, or is it the ones that we've received
There's only a
notification from?
portion, I believe, is it 15 requests, and there are 29 properties. Some of the properties have a buried pipe towards the north end, but no, it's not all properties inclusive that have this easement.
Okay. That's all I got. Thank you. Yield the floor.
Mr. Nordstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was a little hesitant about supporting this motion to send it to council without recommendation, but as I'm pondering about it, I'm becoming more comfortable with it. But what I would like to do, because of that support, is to offer up suggestions for our colleague, Alderwoman Lisa Modrick, to look up some history where I'm coming from. My understanding of it is so that you get a chance to take a look at what I understand as precedent for a similar circumstance is using East Centennial as an example. And another area is looking at an area north side of Anamosa Street called Racine Street, just on the backside of that property. We've gone through, at least I've experienced the area with Racine. Previous councils have dealt with East Centennial, so that would be something in preparation for this opportunity to come forward in approximately 2 weeks for the next, Monday night for this discussion. So just don't want to surprise you. Thank you. We'll discuss it Monday.
And if I may, Mr. Nordstrom, since we do have a fair number of people in the room, if we could get your definition of precedent, because I think what you just said could be left very open-ended and lead to some an interpretation that you did not intend.
That's very possible. My understanding of precedent would be, I do that a lot, is that similar circumstances have taken place on East Centennial. People were installing sheds, putting lawn clippings down in the drainage areaway. This area is halfway developed, so we're only seeing partial flow of water coming into this. So East Centennial is a good example of what to take a look at as far as water flow going through that area. Racine is another good example, water coming off of that hill coming into the backyards, how that was set up as an example. So that's what I mean by precedent, is as we've had to deal with other examples similar to this.
Okay. But when you say precedent,
Yes.
if I were an applicant out here, I would
Yep.
I would think that you just said that what they're asking for has been approved in the past on those two examples, and it's
Has not.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's why I wanted it clarified, Lisa, so that when you do your homework, it's not looking for something that has a solution as to what the applicants want. It's something that, again, just based on the circumstances, was not in the best interest of the city and the neighborhood, despite what an individual property owner wanted. Is that fair to say,
That's
Mr.
very
Nordstrom?
fair to say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Alderwoman Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am a Rapid City native. You know, I was here during the 62 flood, the 72 flood, and all the reparations that happened, the accessing of land, taking of homes, so that we could have a city that would be relatively safe of flooding. We live in an area that will experience floods. And as council people, we have to protect and look at the future of our city and of the developments that are happening around our city. And I would love to say yes to you, because I think you did this with the best of intentions, and you want your kids to be protected. But I want them to be protected too. And I want them to be protected from flooding. And so to have a drainage ditch or a drainage area in the back of your yard, that's hard. you know, and you did this with the best of intentions, and you went out and you asked people, and I think you really meant well, but I think you were given the wrong information. And that's awful, you know, but I think that's what happened. But we need to maintain the drainages we have. It's only with our persistence and vigilance that we've been able to keep those flood events from happening in the city. And so I think that when it comes before council, we'll have more voices to think about this, but this is going to affect your entire neighborhood, and the entire neighborhood isn't here. So I'm going to look at your plans. I'm going to give it a little bit more thought. So I'm not going to come with a closed mind on Monday. I really won't, because I know you've gone to a lot of work. But my concern is the safety of this city. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick point of clarification, Brenda, in case we didn't make it clear in the beginning, the motion on the floor was for items 27 through 29. Okay, thank you. Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a few questions, if I could. I'm sitting here reading a letter that was, I think, written by Kyle Treloar to the city, and says the design of the rear yard lot line drainage swale situated on per city rules is a major drainage easement. It's my opinion the 20-foot major drainage easement is overkill and need not be so wide, since 20 feet width is the city's minimum standard. No objection was made during the design phase. So, and Dale, I don't know, so could I ask Dale Tech? Dale Tech, so we're using the term major drainage easement. Is there a different, do we have different flavors of drainage easements other than major?
The City of Rapid City has historically called the 8-foot easements that you see around the interior of lot lines a minor drainage and utility easement. The term minor easement denotes that it's just the two properties that abut each other between houses. You've got to accommodate your stormwater runoff between those houses, either run it out to the street or behind your house, depending upon how it's graded. That's been the city's practice in calling that a minor drainage easement. Anything else is a major drainage easement. It is to convey water from multiple properties across multiple properties.
Okay, so the old standard easement, if you're platting lots, you basically got 8 feet on, you have a front yard setback, but then you've got 8 feet on the sides and the back, and the two sides and the back, is that correct?
And the front.
And the front, okay. And it's 8 feet on each side, so it's 16 feet.
Correct.
Total. And this is 20 feet. So we're talking 2 feet on each side. So even if you changed this to a minor, could they still build fences over it?
In my opinion, it is still a drainage easement, and it's conveying water from multiple lots across multiple lots. The city would, for maintenance purposes, want to keep that easement clear of all obstructions.
Sure, okay. Well, so who, the decision, probably part of it was topographical and part of it could have been developer driven, but was it developer driven that they decided they wanted all this drainage to go to the rear?
That's correct. The developer, as part of their market analysis or desires to build walkout basements, wanted that rear lot drainage enabled to, get the grading lower in the back of the lot. This was the only way to accommodate that, was to put a rear drainage swale through there, and acknowledged early on that that would be a drainage easement in 20 foot in width. And
I think per the letter, they said that there was no pushback of this major drainage easement at the time of platting.
That's correct.
Was this the first time this developer ever platted lots, or did they do a lot of them?
They've done a fair number of them. I believe this may be the first time that they had included a drainage easement in their rear of a lot, but.
Okay. So maybe you don't recall, but I recall, I don't know, the last year, 6 months, that we had a person come in from, I believe, this development, asking us to resolve drainage problems. Houses next door, was that on this street, do you recall?
No, that wasn't on this street. It was in the same area, but it was not on this street, and I don't believe there was a major drainage easement involved in that discussion.
Because that was a crawl space, I think.
That's
involved.
correct.
Okay,
Right.
all right. Thank you. I don't have any further questions right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Motion on the floor is to continue these 3 items to council without recommendation. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We are now on to item number 30, which is to acknowledge report from staff regarding wild turkey issues in Rapid City. I see we have Parks, and I just gave you a promotion. Parks and Rec Director Jeff Bigler to the podium.
I'm
Thank
sure
you,
Dale
sir.
would be happy to hear that.
He might today.
Thank you very much. As you recall, back in July, Alderman Wright brought this item to City Council as a result of some comments from one of his constituents in his ward regarding some damage that this resident had been experiencing at his home caused by wild turkeys. The area mostly in question are those areas on the west part of town where those properties either abut natural areas or are very near natural areas and the natural habitat for wild turkeys. And we have had some calls over the years, similar calls about wild turkey damage. So we did set about to have this conversation with the city's Urban Wildlife Committee and the South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks. The Game, Fish, and Parks issued a very comprehensive wild turkey management plan this summer, which talks about wild turkey control and management throughout the state of South Dakota, and also did address how to mitigate the damage that people are seeing, particularly here in the areas that abut the natural areas in the Black Hills. And their recommendation and our recommendation is to try to get the word out that feeding turkeys is the way to keep turkeys in your area. John Canta, who's the wildlife manager for the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks, indicated that wild turkeys will come and roost and nest in areas where there's an abundance of food. And so whether that's natural food that they're getting or whether it's food that residents are putting out to either feed their other songbirds or particularly to feed the wild turkeys that are bringing them into the residential areas. So the recommendation is to not feed the wild turkeys, to get to try to encourage them to move along and do what the wild turkeys should do, and that is to maintain their habitat in the pines and grasslands of the hills. So that is the recommendations, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions you might have regarding wild turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Bigler. We'll go to Alderman Solomon, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Make a motion to acknowledge the report. And if I can ask Mr. Bigler a question. So are we thinking about doing any sort of campaign to say, don't be a turkey, don't feed the turkeys to the folks?
You heard it right here.
Historically.
Yeah, I think that's already on record now.
All in the honor of Thanksgiving, of course. But.
What I think we'll do is we'll work with Daryl, our information officer, to try to get some word out. And of course, the media is here as well, and I'm sure they'll put the word out as well, that there is currently an ordinance that the city has that prevents feeding of wildlife. And a lot of people, I'm sure, don't even have any idea that that's out there. So we just need to get the word out to folks that it's not a good idea to feed the wildlife.
Maybe we could get the mayor to do it on his Thursday morning
Gobble, gobble.
spots, yeah.
Thank you for following up on this.
Hey, you
Appreciate
bet.
it.
Alderwoman Drew, please.
Thank you, Chairwoman. This has been a long and drawn-out meeting, but I do feel a need to just comment that I heard from 4 constituents, all in favor of leaving the turkeys alone and not interfering with them in any way, that they enjoyed the turkeys. And so I think getting the word out on not feeding them to people like that may or may not be successful. But I was very surprised that I had that many people call me in favor. Not one was in favor of any kind of elimination of turkeys in the area. So anyway, just a comment. Thank
Well,
you.
if I recall, I think what's happening is adjacent neighbors are encouraging it and it's affecting
Yeah.
neighbors that don't want it, and
Right.
that's obviously
heard from the
challenged.
people.
We need to make concessions when we live next to people. Alderman Nordstrom, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since it's almost the season, do we allow bow hunting up in that area? I know we can't use firearms, so I just.
We do not allow bow hunting in the city limits.
Because.
You can tell.
Because it is the season, and so if we're feeding them, fattening them up, but if we can, but seriously, if people do register a complaint about seeing neighbors, would you support encouraging neighbors, talking to neighbors first before we go through code enforcement, or?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, that's always the best solution, no matter what sort of issue you have with your neighbors, to speak with them first before you call the police.
Police instead of code enforcement?
Right.
Okay. And the game fish and parks also.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yep.
Thank
And
you.
we will be working with Game Fish and Parks if they have any other new information or new mitigation efforts. We've been working with them quite closely with the deer management plan that we have, and we'll certainly continue to monitor their information.
And it's another good reason for people, neighbors, talking to neighbors about it as well, so.
Correct.
Thank you. I'll yield.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bigler. We do have a motion on the floor to acknowledge. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. I have a motion to adjourn by Solomon, a second by Drew. Did you wish to speak to that motion, Mr. Nordstrom? Okay. All those in favor? All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.